I've just talked about, as a Jewish man, how I feel about the terrorist attack. That's a completely different conversation to the same horror that I feel deeply to the genocide in Gaza. And I'm also aware at the same time of the arson at the mosque last night.
That was Zack Polanski, a Jewish man and leader of the Green Party, was on LBC with Goodall. And honestly, it's so refreshing to hear not just a Jewish man calling what's happening in Gaza a genocide, but also condemning the attack at the Manchester synagogue, but also the arson attack on the Peacehaven Mosque in Sussex. Let's take a look.
You're Jewish, you're from Manchester. Your reactions to the last week?
I mean, there's no other authentic reaction other than to say this has been horrific. I'm from the Jewish community. I grew up near the synagogue. I went to synagogue close to the area, and I went to school near the synagogue. And to see what happened, the terrorist attack on our soil, has been deeply both personal and political. At the same time, as a political leader and as an elected member of the London Assembly, some of the work I'm proudest of is interfaith work. And I'm also aware at the same time of the arson at the mosque last night. And I think all of these are reminders that when the forces around the right and the far right come for minority communities, they come for all of us. And actually, the most important response is solidarity.
What are your reactions to the Home Secretary's this morning proposals on the right to protest? I mean, she's talking about the idea of trying to give the police more powers to enforce some restrictions on repeated protests. Hard not to conclude, she denied this to me, but it's hard not to conclude that she's got the Gaza protests in mind with regards to this. What do you think of these proposals?
I think it's deeply irresponsible. I think it's looking to crush dissent. And actually, so I don't repeat too much what your listeners have just heard, I think Baroness Farsi spoke really fluently on this, that this cannot be about turning communities against each other. I've just talked about, as a Jewish man, how I feel about the terrorist attack. That's a completely different conversation to the same horror that I feel deeply to the genocide in Gaza. We know there's, on average, the equivalent of a classroom of children who are massacred every single day. Of course, it's not just children, it's adults too. And so many people in this country, increasingly so, are looking at our British government's role in this genocide and are wanting to go out on the streets in a non-violent way and march, something which has been a proud British tradition ever since we've had a democracy, from the suffragettes to the civil rights movement. And I think it speaks of a government that is losing control, a government that is terrified of being criticised, and a government that actually, or a leadership that knows it's on its way out. And so I'd call on the government and the Home Secretary to do the right thing, both in terms of stop selling arms to Israel and allow people to protest. There was a protest recently with pots and pans where people were protesting against the famine in Palestine. And actually, the reason given by the police for stopping this protest was it might disturb businesses.
Honestly, guys, we need more people like Zack in politics. He has demonstrated he is someone who is fully aware of what's happening around him. He was specifically asked about the synagogue attack, which he addressed, and then chose to also address the arson attack. That's how it should be. Goodall then talks about Shabana Mahmood and her decision to limit repeated protests, calling it un-British, not realising what she said is probably the most un-British thing you could say. Protesting in the UK has been around for over 600 years. Zack then takes it a step further, saying, and I quote, "As a Jewish man, how I feel about the terrorist attack, that's a completely different conversation to the same horror I feel deeply to the genocide in Gaza."
So you're the one who said that we need to have more nuance and complexity in our conversations, and yet you're the one calling Nigel Farage a fascist. Not only do you call Nigel Farage a fascist, you said in your conference speech, accusing Labour politicians of, quote, being active participants in the murdering of Palestinians. So they're murderers, you think?
I think if you sell weapons and bombs that you know are raining on people day in and day out, then I think that's a war crime, and I think you should take responsibility.
So you're saying that that Labour politicians are murderers?
I'm saying that Labour politicians know exactly what they're doing when they vote, or when they are continuing not to condemn and not to vote against arms sales.
They've just recognised the Palestinian state. There's a highly, highly regulated regime, security regime, which you know is complicated because Israel have got difficult relations with some of its enemies, who, by the way, are also our enemies. And yet, despite that fact, you're calling them murderers. Don't you think that politicians ought to be a little bit more careful, you know, particularly in serious positions like yours as a leader of a political party, particularly given all of the political charge and political violence that we're seeing, about using language like fascism and murderers?
Despite the incredulity of your tone, I think anyone can see it is a basic, obvious fact. If you sell weapons to a country that the UN, many genocide scholars are saying are complicit, are active enabling in the genocide, then what I'm saying is complex, it is nuanced, but it's also pretty
What, that they're murderers? It doesn't sound very nuanced, that Polanski, that they're murderers. That is not a nuanced statement.
Give someone a weapon, if your actions give someone a weapon, and that weapon ends in the deaths of thousands, tens of thousands.
And you know it is a point of contestation where the British government denies that those weapons are being used in that genocide, as you put it. So it is more complicated. And you're the one who talks about complexity and nuance, and then you give a series of statements which aren't complex or nuanced at all.
Well, it's good that we're having a conversation so we can keep the complexity and we can keep the nuance. If you are selling fighter jet components, then it's just not believable when we're seeing this live stream, when we're seeing this genocide live streamed on our phones and our TVs, and we always get the answer that the IDF denies it. And Nick Maynard, a doctor, says in Palestine there are bullet wounds in ankles one day, in shoulders another day, in the testicles of teenage boys another day, and the only conclusion you can make is the IDF are using human beings as target practice.
So
to keep, I mean, Farage, you say, is a fascist. To keep him out, which I know you've talked about that you would do at all costs, you'd presumably do a deal with Labour.
I would do anything I can to make sure Nigel Farage...
So you do a deal with a bunch of people you think are murderers?
Well, I think the fundamental thing we need to do is lower people's bills and change material living conditions.
Work with murderers. See, I don't think you really do believe they're murderers, because you wouldn't work with them if you thought they were.
Well, I wouldn't work with Kier Starmer, and I've said that several times. I think Kier Starmer has completely lost the trust of the British public, not just on the genocide, but on the two-child benefit cap, on disability benefits. Again, I don't think it's controversial. You can only look at polling to see how much this country is saying this Prime Minister is not standing for people in this country. So no, I wouldn't work with Kier Starmer, but I don't know who a future Labour leader is, and absolutely, we need, compromise is in the DNA of the Green Party. We want to work with other people. We want a better, more nuanced politics. And I don't think anything I've said in this interview has been unnuanced. I think actually very often, I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm saying more widely, in the media, these conversations are made to sound more complex than they are. But children, adults are dying every single day. And our country is selling weapons to the state that is killing those people. And so to say that that is a line that ends up in the murder of a people is not an absurd statement. I think it actually is just clearly a statement of truth.
Lewis was quick to jump on the bandwagon by saying Israel's enemy is also our enemy. So by that definition, Lebanon, Qatar, Syria, Yemen, and those in the West Bank are all our enemies. That's very naive of Lewis. As Nelson Mandela most famously said, "Your enemies are not my enemies." Zack, a Jewish man, a party leader, refusing to back down, telling Lewis straight the UK is complicit in war crimes. We knew what was happening all this time. We decided to continue selling parts and weapons which we knew were being used directly to kill many thousand civilians. That was Zack Polanski, a Jewish man and leader of the Green Party, condemning Israel's genocide, condemning Labour for its active participation in Gaza, and also condemning the synagogue attack and the arson attack. Good all-round guy. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Support me by liking and subscribing, and I'll see you all on the next video. Peace out.